What's up, YouTube people? Shaggy the Writer coming back at you again with another live stream of Oliver Twist. And this time I'm gonna make you sit through it. I'm gonna make you sit through it. You think I'm playing? I ain't playing no games. You're gonna sit through this stream, you're gonna like it. No. But serious note, last time on Oliver Twist. Oliver was abandoned by his new family and kidnapped and forced back into a life of destitute thievery. Will he escape his old gang's shenanigans? Find out now. Chapter 18: How Oliver Passed His Time in Improving Society of His Reputable Friends. I don't think he's getting away that easily. Still too much of the book left. It's about noon the next day, when the Dodger and Master Bates had gone out to pursue their customary avocations, Mr. Fagin took the opportunity to read Oliver a long lecture on the crying sin of ingratitude, of which he clearly demonstrated he had been guilty to no ordinary extent, wilfully absenting himself from the society of his anxious friends, and still more in endeavoring to escape from them after so much trouble and expense had been incurred in his recovery. Mr. Fagin laid great stress on the fact of his having taken Oliver in and cherished him when, without his timely aid, he might have perished with hunger, and he related the dismal and affecting history of a young lad whom, in his philanthropy, he scoured under parallel circumstances, but who, proving unworthy of his confidence and evidencing a desire to communicate with the police, had unfortunately come to be hanged at the Old Bailey one morning. Ooh boy. Already off to a start here. Mr. Fagin did not seek to conceal his share in the catastrophe, but lamented with tears in his eyes that the wrong-headed and treacherous behavior of the young person in question had rendered it necessary that he should become the victim of certain evidence for which the Crown, which, if it were not precisely true, was indispensably necessary for the safety of him, Mr. Fagin, and a few select friends. Mr. Fagin concluded by drawing a rather disagreeable tripping up on simple words already. This is how you lose viewers. Mr. Fagin concluded by drawing a rather disagreeable picture of the discomforts of hanging, and, with great friendliness and politeness of manner, expressed his anxious hopes that he might never be obligated to submit Oliver Twist to that unpleasant operation. Oh boy. Little Oliver's blood ran cold as he listened to the Jew's words, and imperfectly comprehended the dark threats conveyed in them, that it was possible even for justice itself to confound the innocent with the guilty when they were in accidental companionship, he knew already, and that deep-laid plans for the destruction of inconveniently knowing or over-communicative persons had really devised and carried out by the old Jew on more occasions than one. He thought by no means unlikely, when he recollected the general nature of the altercations between the gentleman and Mr. Sikes, which seemed to bear references between to some foregone conspiracy of the kind, as he glanced timidly up and met the Jew's searching look, he felt that his pale face and trembling limbs were neither unnoticed nor unrelished by that wry old gentleman. The Jew smiled hideously, and, patting Oliver on the head, said that if he kept himself quiet and applied himself to business, he saw they would be very good friends yet. Then, taking his hat and covering himself with an old patched greatcoat, he went out and locked the room door behind him. And so Oliver remained all that day, and for the greater part of many subsequent days, seeing nobody between early morning and midnight, and left during the long hours to commune with his own thoughts, which never failing to revert to his kind friends at the. I'll get some after. Never failing to revert to his kind friends in the opinion they must long ago have formed of him, were sad indeed. Hey, what's up, Fishy? How you doing, buddy? I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. No, I won't. I promise I won't. That's a joke. I just am playing with this new rubber band gun that I got that is way too much fun for an adult to be having with a toy. But anyway, we're sitting here. I am up to chapter 18, and we're really just getting started on chapter 18. Do you need a recap, or did you see what happened already? Because obviously it's not like this story isn't everywhere. But let's see. After the lapse of a week or so, the Jew left the room door unlocked, and he was at liberty to wander about the house. It was a very dirty place. The rooms upstairs had great high wooden chimney pieces and large doors with paneled walls and cornices to the ceilings, which, although they were black with neglect and dust, were ornamented in various ways. From all of the tokens, Oliver concluded that a long time ago, before the old Jew was born, it had belonged to better people, and perhaps been quite gay and handsome, dismal and dreary as it looked now. I am not in a grade, Fishy. I am an adult man. I have an associate's degree from college. So just that immature that I'm playing with a toy gun on camera. I'll have to pick up all kinds of rubber bands after the fact here, but it's cool. Spiders had built their webs in the angles of the walls and ceilings, and sometimes when Oliver walked softly into a room, the mice would scamper across the floor, back terrified to their holes. With these exceptions, there was neither sight nor sound of any living thing, and often when it grew dark and he was tired of wandering from room to room, he would crouch in the corner of the passage by the secret door to be as near living people as he could, and would remain there listening and counting the hours until the Jew or the boys returned. All the rooms, the moldering shutters were fast closed, and the bars which held them were screwed tight into the wood, that the only light which was admitted, stealing its way through the round holes at the top, which made the rooms more gloomy and filled them with strange shadows. There was a black garret window with rusty bars outside, which had no shutter, and out of this Oliver often gazed with a melancholy face for hours together, but nothing was to be descried from it but a confused and crowded mass of housetops, blackened chimneys, and gable ends. Sometimes, indeed, a ragged grisly head might be seen peering over the parapet wall of a distant house, but it was quickly withdrawn again, and as the window of Oliver's observatory was nailed down and dimmed with the rain and smoke of years, it was as much as he could do to make out the forms of the different objects beyond, without making any attempts to be seen or heard, which he had as much chance being as if he had lived inside the ball of St. Paul's Cathedral. So thanks for the like, Fishy. That was dope. One afternoon, the Dodger and Master Bates being engaged out that evening, the first named young gentleman took it into his head to evince some anxiety regarding the decoration of his person, which, to do him some justice, was by no means a habitual weakness with him, and with his end in aim he condescendingly commanded Oliver to assist him in his toilet straight away. Yeah, that's nothing I want to do then. Oliver was but too glad to make himself useful, too happy to have some faces however bad to look upon, and too delirious to conciliate those about him when he could honestly do so, to throw any objection in the way of this proposal. So he at once expressed his readiness, and kneeling on the floor while the Dodger sat upon the table so that he could take his foot in his lap, he applied himself to a process which Mr. Dawkins designated as japanning his trotter cases, which phrase rendered into plain English signifieth cleaning his boots. Signifieth. Okay. Whether it was the sense of freedom and independence which a rational animal may be supposed to feel when he sits, or whether it was the goodness of the tobacco that soothed the feelings of the Dodger, or the mildness of the beer that mollified his thoughts, he was evidently tinctured. Okay, I know the word, but that one just throws me off every time I try to say it. Tinctured. Hooah. So now I have to find my place again. This was not a good day for this, I guess. He was evidently tinctured for the nonce with a spice of romance and enthusiasm foreign to his general nature. He looked down on Oliver, what a thoughtful countenance, for a brief space, and then, raising his head and heaving a gentle sigh, said half in abstraction and half to Mr. Bates, "What a pity! He's a prig." "Oh," said Master Charlie Bates, "he don't know what's good for him." The Dodger sighed again and resumed his pipe as did Charlie Bates. They both smoked for some seconds in silence, keeping in mind that these are children. That's just always just ridiculous. "I suppose you don't even know what a prig is," said the Dodger mournfully. "I think I know that," replied Oliver, looking up. "It's you're one, are you not?" inquired Oliver, checking himself. "I am," replied the Dodger. "I'd scorn to think anything else. Mr. Dawkins gave his hat a Mr. Dawkins gave his hat a ferocious cock after delivering this sentiment, and looked at Master Bates as if to denote that he would feel obligated by saying anything to the contrary. "And this way giving the preaching," added Charlie Bates. "It wouldn't so much as bark at a witness box for fear of committing himself, no, not if you tied him up once and left him there with you out of 4 fortnight." "Not a bit of it," observed Charlie. "He's a rum dog. Don't he look fierce at any stranger cove that laughs or sings when he's in company?" perused the Dodger. "Won't he growl at all when he hears a fiddle playing? And don't he hate other dogs? He ain't of his breed, oh no." "He's an out-and-out Christian," said Charlie. This was merely intended as a tribute to the animal's abilities, but it was an appropriate remark in another sense if Mr. Bates had only known it, for there are a great many ladies and gentlemen claiming to be out-and-out Christians, between whom and Mr. Sykes' dog there exist very strong and singular points of resemblance. Well, said the Dodger, recurring to the point from which they had strayed with the mindfulness of his profession which influenced all his proceedings. God, that's not even a hard phrase. I'm just out of it today. Let me see. God, did I really just lose my place that easily? "Yes, you did, you pollywogger. Use your tiddly-winky ears." Well, well, said the Dodger, recurring to the point from which they had strayed with the mindfulness of his profession which influenced all his proceedings. This hasn't got anything else to do with young Green here. No more it has, said Charlie. Why don't you put yourself under Fagin, Oliver? Oh boy, that was Charlie, not Oliver, and I'm doing Oliver's voice. It's hard keeping the kid voices straight in my head. And make your fortune at a hand, added the Dodger with a grin. And so be able to retire on your property and do the genteel as I mean to in the very next leap year but before that ever comes, and the 42nd Tuesday of Trinity Week, said Charlie Bates. Well, I don't like it, rejoined Oliver timidly. I wish they would let me go. I would rather go. If Fagin would rather not, rejoined Charlie. Oliver knew this too well, but thinking it might be dangerous to express his feelings more openly, he only sighed and went on with his boot cleaning. Go! Exclaimed the Dodger. Well, where's your spirit? Don't you take any pride out of yourself? Would you go and be dependent on your friends? Oh, blow that, said Master Bates, drawing 2 or 3 red silk handkerchiefs from his pocket and tossing them into a cupboard. That's too mean, that is. I couldn't do it, said the Dodger with an air of haughty disgust. You can leave your friends, though, said Oliver with a half smile, and let them be punished for what you did. Oh, that, rejoined the Dodger with a wave of his pipe. That was all out of consideration for Fagin, 'cause the traps know what we worked together, and he might have gotten into trouble if we hadn't made our lucky. That was the move, wasn't it, Charlie? Mr. Bates nodded assent, and would have spoken, but recollection of Oliver's flight came so suddenly upon him that the smoke he was inhaling got entangled with the laugh, and went up into his head, and down into his throat, and brought on a fit of coughing and stamping about 5 minutes long. I'm going to check something real quick, and then get right back to this. You don't unplug your cell phone. Oh, shitty phone. Well, nothing really going on today, and that's probably a good thing. But personally, I'm just gonna keep reading and enjoying myself either way. So, look here, said the Dodger, drawing forth a handful of shillings and a halfpence. Here's a jolly life. What's the odds where it comes from? Here, catch. Oh, there's plenty more where they took from. You won't you? Oh, you precious flat. It's not the 80 either, inquired Charlie Bates. He'll come to be scragged, won't he? Oh, know what that means, replied Oliver. Something in this way, old fella, said Charlie. As he said it, Master Bates caught up an end of his neckerchief and, holding it erect in the air, dropped his head on his shoulder and jerked a curious sound through his teeth, thereby indicating by a live pantomimic representation that scragging and hanging were one and the same thing. That's what it means, said Charlie. Look how he stares, Jack. I never did see such a prime company as that here boy. He'll be his death for me, I know he will. Master Charlie Bates, having laughed heartily again, resumed his pipe with tears in his eyes. You've been brought up bad, said the Dodger, surveying his boots with much satisfaction when Oliver had polished them, not published. Oh, gosh, I'm over here doing Freudian slips and everything. Fagin will make something of you, though, or you'll be the first he ever had that turned out unprofitable. You better begin it once, for you'll come into the trade long before you think of it. You're only losing time, Oliver. Mr. Bates backed this advice with sundry moral admonitions of his own, which, being exhausted, he and his friend Mr. Dawkins launched into a glowing description of the numerous pleasures incidental to the life they led, interspersed with a variety of hints to Oliver that the best thing he could do would be to secure Fagin's favor without more delay by the means which they themselves had employed to gain it. So there's Oliver shining shoes. That is the illustration, if you can see it. Um,
You always put this in your pipe, Nolly,
said Dodger as the Jew was heard unlocking the door above.
if you don't take Foggles and chickens.
Mr. Bates,
He don't know what you mean.
Oliver, it all lies in a nutshell, my dear. In a nutshell, take the Dodger's word for it. He understands the catechism of his trade. The old man rubbed his hands gleefully together as he corroborated his pupil's proficiency. The conversation proceeded no further at this time, for the Jew had returned home accompanied by Miss Betsy and a gentleman whom Oliver had never seen before, but who was accosted by the Dodger as Tom Chitling, and who, having lingered on the stairs to exchange a few gallantries with the lady, now made his appearance. Mr. Chitling was older in years than the Dodger, having perhaps numbered 18 winters, but there was a degree of deference in his deportment towards that young gentleman, which seemed to indicate that he felt himself conscious of a slight inferiority in a point of genius and professional acquirements. He had small twinkling eyes and a pock-marked face, wore a fur cap, corduroy jacket, greasy fustian trousers, and an apron. His wardrobe was, in truth, rather out of repair, but he excused himself to the company by stating that his time was only out an hour before, and that in consequence of having worn the regimentals for 6 weeks past, he had not been able to bestow any attention on his private clothes. Oh boy, I really just lose my place looking at this stupid toy gun. It's too much fun. Mr. Chitling added, with strong marks of irritation, that the new way of fumigating clothes up yonder was an infernal unconstitutional, for it burnt holes in them, and there was no remedy against the county. The same remark he considered to apply to the regulation mode of cutting hair, which he held to be decidedly unlawful. Mr. Chilling wound up in his observations by stating that he had not touched a drop of anything for 42 mortal, long, hard working days, and that he wished he might be busted if he weren't as dry as a lime basket. "Where do you think this gentleman has come from, Oliver?" inquired the Jew with a grin as the other boys put a bottle of spirits on the table. "Oh, yeah," replied Oliver. "What's that?" inquired Tom Chitling, casting a contemptuous look at Oliver. "A young friend of mine, my dear," replied the Jew. "He's a young'un," said the young man, with a meaning look at Fagin. "Never mind where I come from, young'un. You'll find your way there soon enough, I'll bet a crown." At this sally the boys laughed. After some more jokes on the same subject, they exchanged a few short whispers with Fagin and withdrew. After some words apart between the last comer and Fagin, they drew their chairs towards the fire, and the Jew, telling Oliver to come and sit by him, led the conversation to the topics most calculated to the interest of his hearers. These were the great advantages of the trade, the proficiency of the Dodger, the amiability of Charley Bates, and the liberality of the Jew himself. At length these subjects displayed signs of being thoroughly exhausted, and Mr. Chitling did the same, for the house of correction becomes fatiguing after a week or two. Miss Betsy accordingly withdrew and left the party to their repose. Uh, so, oh boy, silly little notifications popping up. From this day, Oliver was seldom left alone, but was placed in almost constant communications with the two boys who played the old game with the Jew every day, whether for their own improvement or Oliver's. Mr. Fagin best knew, at other times, the old man would tell them stories of robberies he had committed in his younger days, mixed that Oliver could not help laughing heartily and shewing that he was amused in spite of all his better feelings. In short, the wily old Jew had the boy in his toils, and having preparated his mind by solitude and gloom to prefer any society to the companionship of his own sad thoughts in such a dreary place, was now slowly instilling into his soul the poison which he hoped would blacken it and change its hue forever. Oh boy. Oh yeah, thanks again for showing up, Fishy. Thanks for the like. Everybody else, I encourage you to like, share, subscribe. We're about to start chapter 19, in which a notable plan is discussed and determined on. But first, I'm going to go grab these rubber bands just because I don't want to forget about them. And oh boy, I have to really stop playing around. La da 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 da. Ja da ja da ja. La sha 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 sha. Oh boy. I'm missing rubber bands now. This is not a good sign. Yeesh. Bachlik Johann Sebastian. That joke wasn't funny yesterday, though. Tatiana texted me. Hey, Tatiana. Oh, everybody saw Tatiana. Okay. So we are back, chapter 19, in which a notable plan is discussed and determined on. The door was locked and chained behind him, and having listened while the boys made all secure and until their retreating footsteps were no longer audible, slunk down the street as quickly as he could. The house to which Oliver had been conveyed was in the neighborhood of Whitechapel. The Jew stopped for an instant at the corner of the street, and glancing suspiciously round, crossed the road and struck off in the direction of Spatial Fields. The mud lay thick upon the stones, and a black mist hung over the streets. The rain fell sluggishly down, and everything felt cold and clammy to the touch. It was just the night when it befitted such a being as the Jew to be abroad. He glided stealthily along, creeping beneath the shelter of the walls and doorways. The hideous old man seemed like some loathsome reptile, endangered in the slime and darkness through which he moved, crawling forth by night in search of some rich offal for a meal. He kept on his course through many winding and narrow ways until he reached Bethnal Green. Then, turning suddenly off to the left, he soon became involved in a maze of the mean and dirty streets which abound in that close and densely populated quarter. The Jew was evidently too familiar with the ground he traversed, however, to be at all bewildered either by the darkness of the night or the intricacies of the way. He hurried through several alleys and streets, at length turned into one, lighted only by a simple lamp at the farther end. At the door of a house on this street he knocked, and having exchanged a few muttered words with the person who opened it, walked up the stairs. The dog growled as he touched the handle of a room door, and a man's voice demanded who was there. Ah, I hate Bill Sikes. I hate Bill Sikes. Only me, Bill. Only me, my dear, said the Jew, looking in. Bringing was in his nature to be. Well, said Sikes. Well, my dear, replied the Jew. Ah, Nancy. The latter recognition was uttered with just enough embarrassment to imply doubt of its receptor, for Fagin and his young friend had not met since she had interfered in behalf of Oliver. All doubts on the subject, if he had any, were speedily removed by the young lady's behavior. She took her feet off the fender, pushed back the chair, and bade Fagin draw up his without saying more about it, for it was a cold night and no mistake. It is cold, Nancy dear, said the Jew as he warmed his skinny hands over the fire. It seems to go right through one, he added to the man touching his side. It must be a pleasure if it falls this way for your heart, said Mr. Sikes. Give him something to drink, Nancy. Burn me body, make haste. It's enough to turn a man ill to see his lean old cocky shivering in that way, like an ugly ghost just rose from the grave. Nancy quickly brought a bottle from the cupboard, in which there were many, which, to judge from the diversity of their appearance, were filled with several kinds of liquids. Sikes, pouring out a glass of his brandy, bade the Jew drink it off. Quite enough, quite, thank you, Bill, replied the Jew, putting down the glass after setting his lips to it. What, you're afraid you are getting the better of you, are you? Inquired Sikes, fixing his eyes on the Jew. Ugh! With a hoarse grunt of contempt, Mr. Sikes seized the glass and threw the remainder of its contents into the ashes as a preparatory ceremony to filling it again for himself, which he did at once. The Jew glanced round the room as his companion tossed down the second glassful, not in curiosity, for he had seen it often before, but in restless and suspicious manner which was habitual to him. It was a meanly furnished apartment, with nothing but the contents of the closest to introduce the belief that its occupier was anything but a working man, and with no more suspicious articles displayed to view than 2 or 3 heavy bludgeons which stood in the corner, and a life-preserver that hung over the chimney-piece. There, said Sikes, smacking his lips. Now I'm ready. For business? Inquired the Jew. For business, replied Sikes. So say what you've got to say. About the Ribbit Tootsie Bill, said the Jew, drawing his chair forward and speaking in a very low voice. Yes, what about it? Inquired Sikes. Ah, you don't know what I mean, my dear, said the Jew. He knows what I mean, Nancy, don't he? No, he don't, sneered Mr. Sikes. Or he won't, and that's the same thing. Speak out and call things by their right names. Don't sit there winking and blinking and talking to me in hints as if you weren't the very first thought about robbery. What do you mean? Hush, Bill, hush, said the Jew, who had attempted to stop this burst of indignation. Somebody will hear us, my dear. Somebody will hear us. Yeah. Nothing more. Now, my dear, about that ribbon, say, what When is it to be done, Bill, eh? When is it to be done? Such plate, my dears, such plate, said the Jew, rubbing his hands and elevating his eyebrows in rapture of anticipation. Not at all, replied Sikes coldly. Not to be done at all? Echoed the Jew, leaning back in his chair. Not at all, rejoined Sikes. At least it can be a put-up job just as we expected. Then it hasn't been properly gone about, said the Jew, turning pale with anger. Don't tell me. But I will tell you, retorted Sikes. Who are you that's not to be told? I tell you that Toby Crackit has been hanging about the place for a fortnight, and he can't get one of the servants into a yard. Clean up! Thank you! What do you mean to tell me, Bill? Said the Jew, softening as the other grew heated. That neither of the two men in the house can be got over? Yes, I do mean to tell you, replied Sikes. The old lady has had 20 of 'em these 20 years, and if you were to give him £500, they wouldn't be in it. But do you mean to say, my dear, remonstrated the Jew, that the woman can't be got over? Not a bit of it, replied Sikes. Not by the flesh, not Toby Cricket, said the Jew incredulously. Think of what women are, Bill. No, not even by Toby Cricket, replied Sikes. He says he's worn some whiskers in a canary waistcoat, and the whole blessed time he's been ordering down there in his supply use. You should have tried mustachios and a pair of trousers, my dear, said the Jew. So he did, rejoined Sikes. There weren't no more use of that other plant. The Jew looked very blank at this information. After enumerating for some minutes, with his chin sunk on his breast, he raised his head and said with a deep sigh that if Flash Toby Crackit reported all right, he feared the game was up. And yet, said the old man, dropping his hands to his knees, it's a sad thing, my dear, to lose so much when we had set our hearts upon it. So it is, said Mr. Sikes. Worse yuck. A long silence ensued, during which the Jew was plunged in deep thought, with his face wrinkled into an expression of villainy perfectly demoniacal. Sikes eyed him furtively from time to time. Nancy, apparently fearful of irritating the housebreaker, sat with her eyes fixed upon the fire, as if she'd been deaf to all that passed. Fagin, said Sikes, abruptly breaking the stillness that prevailed, is he worth 50 shillings extra if he's safely done from the outside? Yes, said the Jew, as suddenly rousing himself. Is it a bargain? Inquired Sikes. Yes, my dear, yes, rejoined the Jew, as his eyes glistened and every muscle in his face working with the excitement of his inquiry awakened. Then, said Sikes, thrusting aside the Jew's hand with some disdain, "Ye come off as soon as you like. Toby and I were over the garden wall the night before last, sounding the panels of the door and shutters. The crib barred up at night like a jail, but there's one part we can crack safely and softly." What's that, Bill? Asked the Jew eagerly. "Why," whispered Sikes, "as you cross the yon—" "Yes, yes," said the Jew, bending his head forward with his eyes almost staring out of it. "Humph!" cried Sikes, stopping short as the girl, scarcely moving her head, looked suddenly around and pointed for an instant at the Jew's face. "Never mind which part it is, you can't do it without me, I know,
but it's the best to be on the safe side when one deals with you.
As you like, my dear, as you like, replied the Jew. Is there no help wanted but yours and Toby's?
None, said Sikes. Except Sentry Bishop, boy. First we've both got exactly you must for us.
Oh boy, exclaimed the Jew. Oh, that is a panel, eh?
Never mind what it is, replied Sikes. Oh, what a boy! He mustn't be a big un yord,
said Mr. Sikes reflectively.
If I'd only got that young boy of Ned the chimney sweeper's, he'd have kept him small on purpose and let him out by the job. But your father gets lagged, and the Juvenile Delinquent Society comes and takes the boy from a trade where he was earning money, teaches him to read and write, and time makes a apprentice of him, and so they go on,
said Mr. Sikes, his wrath rising with the recollection of his wrongs.
So they go on, and if they got money enough, which it's a providence they have not, we should have half a dozen boys left in the whole trade in a year or two.
No more we should, acquiesced the Jew, who had been considering during this speech and had only caught the last sentence. Bill?
What now?
Inquired Sikes. The Jew nodded his head towards Nancy, who was still gazing at the fire, and intimidated by a sign that he would have told her to leave the room. Sikes shrugged his shoulders impatiently, as if he thought the precaution unnecessary, but complied nevertheless by requesting Miss Nancy to fetch a jug of beer for him.
You don't want any beer?
Said Nancy, folding her arms and retaining her seat very composedly.
I tell you what,
replied Sikes.
Nonsense,
rejoined the girl coolly.
Go on, Fagin, I know he's going to say, Bill, he needn't mind me.
The Jew still hesitated. Sikes looked from one to the other in surprise.
Why don't you mind the old girl, do you, Fagin?
He asked at length.
You've known her long enough to trust her, or the devil's in it. She ain't the one to blab, are you, Nancy? I should think not,
replied the young lady, drawing her chair up to the table and putting her elbows upon it. No, my dear, I know you're not, said the Jew, but... And again the old man paused.
But what?
inquired Sikes. I didn't know whether she mightn't perhaps be out of sorts, you know, my dear, as she was the other night, replied the Jew. At this confession, Miss Nancy burst into a loud laugh, and swallowing a glass of brandy, shook her head with an air of defiance, and burst into sundry exclamations of
"Keep the game a-going, never say die,"
and the like. These seemed to have the effect of reassuring both gentlemen, for the Jew nodded his head in a satisfied air and resumed his seat, as Mr. Sikes did likewise.
"Now, Fagin,"
said Nancy with a laugh,
"tell Bill at once about Oliver."
"Ah, you're a clever one, my dear, the sharpest girl I ever saw," said the Jew, patting her on the neck. "It was about Oliver I was going to speak, sure enough."
"What about him?"
demanded Sikes. "He's the boy for you, my dear," replied the Jew in a hoarse whisper, laying his finger on the side of his nose and grinning frightfully.
"He!"
exclaimed Sikes.
"Have him, Bill," said Nancy. "I would if I was in your place. He mayn't be so much up as the
others," rejoined Fagin. "He's been in good training these last few weeks, and it's time to begin to work for his bread. Besides, all the others are too big."
"Well, he is the size that I want,"
said Mr. Sikes, ruminating, not remunerating. There are no numbers involved. And we'll do everything you want, Bill, my dear, interposed the Jew. He can't help himself. That is, if you frighten him enough.
Frighten him?
Echoed Sykes.
In £4. You won't see him in your life.
And he's ours for life. Oh, it couldn't have come about better. The old man crossed his arms around his breast, and drawing his head and shoulders into a heap, literally hugged himself for joy.
Ours, said Sykes. Yours, you mean?
Perhaps I do, dear, said the Jew with a shrill chuckle. Mine if you like, Bill.
And what?
Said Sykes, scowling fiercely on his agreeable friend.
What you know there are 50 boys snoozing about coming guys every night, as you might pick and choose from?
Because they're of no use to me, my dear, replied the Jew with some confession. Not worth the taking. Their looks convict them when they get into trouble, and I lose them all. With this boy, properly managed, my dears, I could do what I couldn't with 20 of them. Besides, said the Jew, recovering his self-possession, he has us now if he little boy out of the way, which it would be so dangerous, and we should lose it besides.
When is it to be done?
Said Nancy, stepping over some turbulent exclamation on the part of Mr. Sykes, expressive of the disgust with which he received Fagin's affection of humanity. Ah, to be sure, said the Jew. When is it to be done, Phil?
I planned with Toby not after tomorrow,
rejoined Sykes in a surly voice,
if he heard nothing from me to the contrary.
Good, said the Jew. There's no moon.
No, rejoined Sykes.
It's all about the rains and bringing off the swag, is it? Said the Jew. Sykes nodded. And about?
Oh, he's all planned. Yes. You put to bring your boy here tomorrow night. I shall get to the stones in an hour after daybreak. Then you hold your tongue and keep the melting pot ready.
Yeah, they be flexing with swag. Yeah, you should assign to the care and custody of Mr. William Sykes, and further that the said Sykes should deal with him as he thought fit, and should not be held responsible by the Jew for any mischance or evil that might befall the boy, or any punishment.
I can find them.
Okay,
How many have you shot?
a couple.
You definitely need to find them. You can't they die. There's
Okay.
nothing to do for it.
Make sure there aren't any out here.
Jesus, how do you know this? They're right there. The shit with your license is between when I kill Monday.
Okay.
Against my better judgment. If he finds out, he'll fucking kill you. I'm not playing with this either. You better make sure that all those rubber bands are picked up.
I gotcha. Okay. Got all my rubber bands. It's oh boy. The preliminaries adjusted, Mr. Sykes proceeded to drink brandy at a furious rate, and to flourish the crowbar in an alarming manner, yelling forth at the same time most unmusical snatches of song mingled with wild excretions. At length, in a fit of professional enthusiasm, he insisted upon producing his box of housebreaking tools, which he had no sooner stumbled in with and opened for the purpose. Nancy said the
Good night.
is that they have very little things serves to call up some long forgotten feeling, and the best thing of them is that it never lasts. Man against the child for a bag of gold. Beguiling the time with these pleasant reflections, Mr. Fagin wended his way through mud and mire to his gloomy abode, where the Dodger was sitting up impatiently awaiting his return.
Is Oliver bed? I want to speak with him.
Were his first remarks as he descended the stairs. "Hours ago," replied the Dodger, throwing open a door. "Here he is." The boy was lying fast asleep on a rude bed upon the floor, so pale with anxiety and sadness and the closeness of his prison that he looked like death. Sadness and the closeness of his prison that he looked like death, not death as it shows, a gross airing softly away tomorrow. That's where we're at. Once again, there are about a zillion things that would not be politically correct today here. And I'm just kind of compounding them by being also a Jew who does not care that the main one of the main characters is just called the Jew every other word. They don't even like calling him Mr. Fagin. But we're on to chapter 20, wherein Oliver is delivered over to Mr. William Sykes. When Oliver awoke in the morning, he was a good deal surprised to find that a new pair of shoes with strong, thick soles had been placed at his bedside, and that his old ones had been removed. At first, he was pleased with the discovery, hoping that it might be the forerunner of his release, but such thoughts were quickly dispelled on his sitting down to breakfast along with the Jew, who told him with a tone and manner which increased his alarm, that he was to be taken to the residence of Bill Sykes that night. "Do you stop there, sir?" asked Oliver anxiously. "No, my dear," by the earnest cunning of Fagin's looks and his own speculations, to make any further inquiries about. Just then he had no opportunity, for the Jew remained very surly but silent till night, when he prepared to go abroad. "You may burn a candle," said the Jew, putting one on the table. "And here's a book for you to read till they come fetch you. Good night." "Good night," replied Oliver softly. The Jew walked to the door, looking over his shoulder at the boy as he went. Suddenly stopping, he called him by his name. Oliver looked up. The Jew, pointing to the candle, motioned him to the light. He did so, and as he placed the candlestick upon the table, saw that the Jew was gazing fixedly at him with lowering and contracted brows from the dark end of the room. "Take heed, Oliver, take heed," said the old man, shaking his right hand in a warning manner. "He is a tough man and thinks nothing of blood when his own is up. Whatever falls out, say nothing and do what he minds you," placing a strong emphasis on that last word. He stuffed his features gradually to resolve himself into a ghastly grin, nodding his head, left the room. Oliver, learning his really okay. Oliver, leaning his head upon his hand when the old man disappeared, and pondered with a trembling heart on the words he had just heard. The more he thought of the Jew's admonition, the more he was at a loss to define the real purpose and with Fagin, and after meditating for a long time, concluded that he had been selected to perform some ordinary menial offices for the housebreaker until another boy better suited for his purpose could be engaged. He was too well accustomed to suffering, and had suffered too much where he was, to bewail the prospect of change very severely. He remained lost in thought for some minutes, and then with a heavy sigh snuffed the candle, and taking up the book which the Jew had left with him, began to read.
Excuse me. Are you sure that was all the rubber bands that you shot?
Yeah.
Make sure. Not for in here.
Oh, sorry about that. Let's see. Of man in deep pits and wells, which would not keep them down, deep as they were, but had yielded them up as fast, after many years, and so maddened the murderers with the sight, that in their horror they had confessed their guilt, and yelled for the gibbet to end their agony. Here, too, he read of men who, lying in their beds at dead of night, had been tempted, as they said, and led on by their own bad thoughts to such dreadful bloodshed as it made the flesh creep and limbs quail to think of. The terrible descriptions were so real and vivid that the shallow pages seemed to run red with gore, and the words upon them to be sounded in his ears as if they were whispered in a hollowed murmur by the spirits of the dead. Oh boy. Hang on 1 second. Oh, come on, chat. You'll be garbage all day. Oh well. In a paroxysm of fear, the boy closed the book and thrust it from him. Then, falling upon his knees, he prayed heaven to spare him from such deeds, and rather to will he should die at once than be reserved for crimes so fearful and appalling. By degrees he grew more calm, and besought in a low and broken voice that he might be rescued from his present dangers, and that if any aid were to be raised up for a poor outcast boy, he had never known the love of his friends or kindred, and might come to him now, when, desolate and deserted, he stood alone in the midst of wickedness and guilt. He had concluded his prayer, but still remained with his head buried in his hands when a rustling noise aroused him. "What's that?" he cried, starting up and catching sight of a figure standing by the door. "Who's there?" "Only me," replied a tremulous voice. Oliver raised the candle above his head and looked towards the door. He inquired if she were ill. The girl threw herself into a chair, and with her back towards him, and wrung her hands and made no reply. "God forgive me," she cried after a while. "I never thought of this." "Has anything happened?" asked Oliver. "Can I help you? Or will if I can, I will indeed." She rocked herself to and fro, caught her throat, and uttering a gurgling sound, struggled and gasping for breath. "Nancy!" cried Oliver. "What is it?" The girl beat her hands upon her knees and her feet upon the ground, and then suddenly stopping, drew her shawl close round her and shivered with the cold. "She got that Rona." I'm kidding. I hope that nobody gets that Rona, but it's already too late because I guess a million people have, which is 1 in every 1,000, and that's pretty scary regardless. Oliver stirred the fire, drawing her chair close to it. She sat there for a little time without speaking, but at length she raised her head and looked round. "I don't know what comes over me sometimes," she said, affecting to busy herself in arranging her dress. "It's this damp, dirty room, I think. Now, Nelly, good dear, are you ready?" "Am I ready to go with you?" asked Oliver. "Yes, I've come from Bill," replied the girl. "You were to go with me. You, and whatever they make you do, is no fault of yours. Hush, every word from you is a blow for me. Give me your hand, make haste, George." Tonight my connection is unstable. And it doesn't have any reason to be. This is the same place I'm always connected. But look at the chat. Look at Shaggy, please. Look at the chat too. And all this literally just loaded. I don't even know if this is still live at the moment. Let me come back to this momentarily, I guess. The girl still held Oliver fast by the hand and continued to pour into his ear the warnings and assurances she had already imparted. All was so quick and hurried that he had scarcely time to recollect where he was or how he had came there when the carriage stopped at the house to which the Jew's steps had been directed on the previous evening. For one brief moment, Oliver cast a hurried glance along the emptied street, and a cry for help hung upon his lips, but the girl's voice was in his ear, beseeching him in such tones of agony to remember her that he was gone, for he was already in the house and the door was shut. Okay, now everything is highlighted.